All right, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Thank you all for being with us this evening. And as we typically do, we'll begin with our invocation led by Commissioner Stoney Rushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you'd like, please join me. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us here tonight to conduct the business of the people of Union County. Father, we pray that you be with the family of Lance Simpson as they're in time of need. Also be with the families of the students that we've lost this week and last in the tragic accidents in Union County. In your precious holy name we pray. Amen.
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 Join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. We have a proclamation for Red Ribbon Week for October 23rd through the 31st. I will read the proclamation and then we shall vote on it. Whereas communities across America have been plagued by the numerous problems associated with illicit drug use and those that traffic in them, and whereas there is hope in winning the war on drugs, and that hope lies in education and drug demand reduction, coupled with the hard work and determination of organizations such as the Mecklenburg County Young Marines of the Marine Corps League to foster a healthy, drug-free lifestyle, and whereas governments and community leaders know that citizen support is one of the most effective tools in the effort to reduce the use of illicit drugs in our communities. Whereas the red ribbon has been chosen as a symbol commemorating the work of Enrique Kiki Camarena, a Drug Enforcement Administration special agent who was murdered in the line of duty, and represents the belief that one person can make a difference. Whereas the Red Ribbon Campaign was established by Congress in 1988 to encourage a drug-free lifestyle and involvement in drug prevention and reduction efforts, and whereas October 23rd through the 31st has been designated National Red Ribbon Week, which encourages Americans to wear a red ribbon to show their support for a drug-free environment. Now therefore, the Union County Board of Commissioners hereby proclaims October 23rd through the 31st as Red Ribbon Week in Union County, North Carolina, and urges all citizens to join in this special observance. All in favor in adopting this proclamation signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, none. And my understanding is Corporal Harrison is here to receive this honor. You want a picture with all of us? Come on up here. There's got to be a mom in the room somewhere taking a picture. You want to come up closer and get one? Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Proud of you, Marine.
All right, that will take us to item number 4, which is a continuation of the public hearing from our prior meeting, CZ 2017-001, Waxhaw Nixon. The board opened this public hearing for rezoning application CZ 2017-001 Waxhaw Nixon at its regular meeting on September 5th. During that portion of the public hearing, the board received comments from the applicant, officials of the town of Waxhaw, and all persons in attendance who signed up to speak. A motion was passed to continue the hearing to tonight at 7 p.m. This was for the purpose of allowing the board to receive additional information requested and to ask any follow-up questions deemed appropriate in order to make an informed decision. There will not be additional public comments unless expressly requested by the board, and this public hearing is now reopened. So, Mr. Matthews.
Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. As the Chairman stated, this is essentially a continuation of the previous public hearing. There were some questions about the project at our last meeting, and we've obtained some additional information that we would like to share with the board and certainly answer any questions that you may have. One of the questions that came about had to do with a traffic impact analysis that is required for our projects at the time. We did not have an approved traffic impact analysis from NCDOT. There was essentially some discussions with DOT about off-site improvements for the project. I will report that it was identified that there were some uses within the original application from the developer that NCDOT did not necessarily include in their analysis of their traffic impact analysis. We made them aware of that. However, today we did receive a word from NCDOT that they have agreed to approve the TIA contingent upon a shared cost funding agreement. Now, whether or not the developer can meet that requirement, that's not really up for us to say at this point in time, but it is contingent upon that particular element. DOT did say that they were fine with the TIA as presented. They're aware that there were some land uses that are not specifically called out for traffic generation, but they've indicated they are supporting the TIA as submitted with the exception of the cost share agreement. One of the other things we talked about were some of the, I guess, differences in what the county's regulations are, what the developer presented, and some of the town of Waxhaw requests. I did want to clarify the question about stormwater. There was a question of whether the county's stormwater regulations were more stringent or the town of Waxhaw's were more stringent. It's really kind of a toss-up, to be honest with you. Our regulations, from what we've gathered from the town of Waxhaw, when it comes to detention itself, are a little bit more stringent. We require the 2-year and the 25-year storm design. That's my understanding that theirs is the 2 and the 10 years, so it's a little bit less than ours. But the town of Waxhaw has a sediment erosion control program, which we do not. They also have a stormwater design manual, which the developers are required to follow that design manual, which we do not. We allow them to use any design techniques that they want. And they sometimes incorporate water quality requirements within their stormwater regulations, and we do not. Ours are simply water quantity. So it's really a toss-up. Some of our stuff's a little more stringent than theirs. Some of theirs is a little more stringent than ours. You really couldn't say one way or the other. It's which way the board would feel inclined if they were to approve this request. I also reached out to the planning director, Dennis Rory, got some comments from him about the submittal that we had at the last meeting, because there was some question about whether there were changes to that plan and whether or not the town had considered those. He had some questions about the wording as far as the sidewalk being placed as an additional condition. They were supportive of that. That was a Waxhaw request. However, the town had asked for some clarification on the language for the developer, and that really had to do with making sure that the developer put the sidewalks on the site's frontage, including at intersection and crosswalks as appropriate. Again, we think that's sort of a minor note that we can certainly discuss that with the developer. The Class C buffer, there was clarification. That's actually a town Class C buffer, and developer actually indicated that they would put a Class C buffer on the property that was adjacent to the residential. We don't have a Class C buffer. Ours is an S2, but their Class C buffer for the town is more stringent than ours, and the developer agreed that he would actually follow that Class C buffer. Also, one of the things that The developer had indicated that they would follow some architectural guidelines, and I believe it was state that they would follow the ones for the Cuthbertson Road, Providence Road, Kensington intersection. And Dennis indicated that the town would actually recommend that they follow the same design guidelines as the Carrington Square development, which that's shown on your screen. That is the design that he sent me as far as a possible architectural design if this were to be approved. And then essentially, it was Waxaw's understanding that they did not have an approved TIA. It's our understanding that DOT has approved it with that contingent section. And also, he did not see where the developer had responded to the mast arm traffic signals that the town had originally asked as part of the development. Those are the things that we're aware of as far as some questions and yes, concerns. There may very well be others. But I wanted to at least address those items and answer any questions the board may have about the project at this time.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Matthews? All right. Mr. Mayor, you had requested time to speak. All right, we'll hear from you.
One of the beauties of taking time to get up here is that you get an email from Brian and Dennis at 5:42 indicating that they had worked through several things, which I want to applaud both sides. That's the way this should work, where the staffs are working together, and I think that's great. Over the course of 2 weeks, a lot of progress has been made. I'm going to go to the specifics and then come back to providing some clarity. We would respectfully disagree that it's a wash when it comes to erosion control. We've had some donut hole annexations that have created serious erosion controls using old standards to new. So we would encourage you to, while the stormwater may be a wash, the erosion control, we would recommend the application of Waxaw's erosion control should this go forward. The Class C buffer, just a point of clarity, I think in the plan, or at least what we were told in the plan, the distance was 25 feet. Our Class C buffer is 45 feet to the neighborhood, and we would ask that you consider that as well. When it comes to the TIA, we would recommend the developer to be required to build all road improvements and not bond them for public body to handle at a later date. That's putting the burden on the public entity to try to build the roads at a later date and incur that time and energy and staffing to accomplish that. I do want to clarify some of the confusion that popped up last meeting and has been expressed through multiple mediums. I also want to express my thanks to Commissioner Rushing and Commissioner Helms for spending time making themselves available to get through some of these questions. Couple things. As you all know, annexation is voluntary. Just to be clear, Waxaw has not had any conversations where the owner has expressed any desire or interest in annexation at any detailed level. Density. At the last meeting, and I'm expressing this one because Commissioner Rushing and I had this discussion. This should not be about an us versus them. This should be about some clarification. At the last meeting, a number was quoted on the theoretical housing density with Waxaw near 250 across the entire property. That's a theoretical number. Staff did a practical application to the portion of the property that would be residential and land use. Best case, it would be 50% of that 250 number if it was townhomes. It would probably be closer to 25% if it was actual housing. So don't want you to think that we're out here with an intense density for that piece of property there. We do not, and I'm going to repeat this, we do not have a bonus density policy as was expressed by numerous people at the last meeting. There is a statement within our comprehensive plan that references action that may have to be taken if and when infrastructure is implemented in a restricted growth area south of the town. That was merely an accommodation to the entire fire district. The county has no plans for water and sewer down in the south end. We have no plans for roads. It's totally wide open space at this point in time. And it was just an accommodation in the comprehensive plan to acknowledge it if and when that should come forward. At this point in time, we've not completed our UDO rewrite, and we don't have any plan to move aggressively on that. We're going to take our time. We learned from 2012 when we rushed through some code changes, and we now have an apartment complex coming up in downtown Waxhaw that nobody anticipated. So we're going to test and retest before we implement our code. And so bonus density is not something on the table, and it would not be on the table, and it would be tested if anybody brought it up. Lastly, you asked the opinion of adding the use of specifically a K through 12 school. Obviously, we did not study the revenue impact, either sales or negative impact on property tax. I'm just going to spell it out. Staff would not recommend a K through 12 school at this site within the current plan for safety reasons. Further, staff went the additional mile and made a recommendation, although it's not policy yet because we have to take it to the board. They would not recommend a K through 12 school anywhere off of Highway 16 as it exists today. It's a tremendous amount of site and roadway mitigation would be required to accommodate this impact to ensure minimum safety. So up and down the 16 corridor at this point in time, as of 5:43, when they sent me the follow-up note, they do not recommend K through 12 anywhere going up and down the 16 corridor, given the way it is constructed today. So thank you very much for accommodating me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Can we ask questions, please?
Sir, if you have a question for the mayor.
Mine. And I thank you for giving me a call the other day, because I spoke to a very nice lady from Indonesia.
I did too this morning.
Very, very nice lady, very concerned neighbor, and she's, we want to make sure that everybody's getting the right information. This is something that you and I talked about.
Yep.
That we're clear. What we spoke of the other day was 140 townhomes, not 250, right?
The original quote from last week was 246, 250. We went back and did the maximum if you did townhomes, and it would be close to 140 townhomes. Residential would be
Like
no more than 50 homes.
50 homes. The school was not K-12. They're playing on I think K-8 at that site, so it wasn't K-12. So just for
We wouldn't distinguish.
right.
We distinguish the difference K through 12, and then post-secondary.
Right, and I think what I think when the developer gets that opportunity, I think he may have had some meetings, but from my understanding from the school is that they're interested in K-8 and off-site somewhere having the high school portion of that. With that 140 townhomes, also, as according to our staff, you had planned 30,000 to 40,000 square feet of commercial on 16.
On the third, we haven't planned anything. Our zoning
where did that
use
number-
would allow
Your
commercial
use, okay.
on the front part, yes.
So your use would allow for the 30,000 to 40,000 square feet of commercial and the 140
Correct.
townhomes. So that's what we're looking at. And a big difference between 250, but still probably more valuable to the developer to build those townhomes than to build anything else to do the commercial, I would think.
Yeah, I'm not going to make a value judgment on what's valuable or not for the developer. The discussion was around the intensity and the impact on traffic, and the calculation we did that if you did 2.5 cars per home with the townhomes, those 2.5 cars would need to make 20 trips a day in and out to have the impact that a commercial use would. And so let's not, again, to our discussion point, let's not compare, contrast, pit each other. It's just a different use, and you got a tough decision as to which use to make.
And I think that's what we need that people need to understand, because there's a belief that nothing will ever go there.
Correct.
And I think that all plans lead to something going there, whether it's what we put there or what you put there, or whoever puts it there.
Correct.
And that people need to understand that there is a plan. And again, thank you. You're in the same boat that we are. You have tough decisions to make, and you have by no means any member of your town council to be blamed or to, nothing was trying to do that. Just want to make sure people understand what the process is and what the value of that land is, whether it's commercial or whether it's residential and commercial together.
I guess, Commissioner Rushing, your time's up now.
My time's up. I'll shut up.
Any other questions for the mayor? All right. Mr. Rosenberg, would you like to make any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I got too many pieces of paper here. With respect to the school, we were asked to have some discussions with the school, which we did, but there's absolutely no arrangement or anything of any kind. I want to be very clear with that. What we did do, though, was have our engineers do a traffic analysis of what the difference would be if we didn't have the discount club and we had the school. Some of you know Barry Moose. Barry's our traffic engineer. He was the divisional engineer here. The numbers drop from 8,657 daily, they refer to generated trips, that's cars going back and forth, down to 6,144 generated trips. So it's more than a 20% reduction. That's an actual fact using the manuals that they use for traffic. With respect to stormwater and water quality, as Brian had said, the county's requirements are 2 and 25, the towns are 2 and 10. With respect to water quality, we use the state DENR requirement, which is what the county uses. It's not we use the county, and the town uses the county requirements. So we think we're within whatever standards required from that point of view. With respect to the buffer, if you remember, we showed you a plan where we lowered the building. So what we've done is drop the building down, so when you look out the backyard of the residential, you're not going to see the building. Plus, we agreed to what's referred to as the C-class buffer that provides a screen. Plus, we agreed to a fence. So we think we've done beyond what's required and reasonable to mitigate any impact to those homes that are behind us. You know, I find myself in a difficult position here, but we looked at the town's plan. The town's plan refers to urban density. As the mayor's just acknowledged, there's 3-story apartments going up in the town. Usually urban density would be a lot higher than 150 units because you'd have 7 acres of commercial out front, you'd have 20 on the back. As somebody who chaired the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission, I can tell you urban density would be anywhere from 12 to 17 units an acre. So I think the density, if we were doing an application, and we aren't, we would have a density well in excess of 200 units per acre. I think, the other question we were asked was the impact on the stream. I think Commissioner Helms asked that. That's just under 300 feet, which is what is required with respect to Army Corps of Engineers. Will be less than 300 feet. And that's what's open on the stream. And this is an open area around it, which is a detention pond. I think I've covered the buffer. I think I've covered, Mr. Chairman, the questions that were asked. I'm open to any questions that the commissioners may have.
All right, any questions? Vice Chairman?
Your 8,657, that volume is per day, per week?
Yeah, that's per day, but don't take that as trips generated because I don't know the math or how they determine that. With the school, it's 6,144. That was all in the TIA, Mr. Helms, that was submitted.
Mr. Rushing?
And your discussions with the school, they're ongoing.
They're ongoing, yes.
And you've had some, you know, so with these numbers, that would dramatically affect the traffic.
Would reduce the traffic, yeah.
What kind of acreage are they needing, or what are they?
What they talked to us about, it was 20 acres, which would leave the 7 acres out front that the mayor spoke of was in their plan of some 40,000 square feet of commercial. One of the other things that relates to traffic, Commissioner Rushing, is that as you know, I'm sure, there's a lot of new retail on Providence Road in Mecklenburg. There's many hundreds of thousands square feet, probably 700,000 or 800,000. That traffic, as our engineers say, is going to be going up Providence. So it's a question, do you want to capture some of that for your sales tax, or is it all going to go into Mecklenburg County?
Any additional questions? All right.
I think the mayor's trying to get your attention.
Mr. Mayor, would you like to speak again?
I just want to.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I think our friend from Indonesia said she couldn't hear you the other day because you spoke from the crowd. So let's, if you wouldn't mind coming to the microphone.
I just wanted to add a point of clarity as you look at the TIA and what you actually require. Should a school go in there, it's not a per day calculation. It's peak periods in the morning, peak period in the afternoon, and the other impact, and this is where there was disagreement on the original TIA, is the length of the queue out on 16 going either way. The original was at 150 feet. The calculation that our staff did, and from the experiences we have with current charter school, is it's much longer than that, approaching 250 to 300. And so just whatever you decide, make sure you consider that as you move forward, because it is a difference.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenberg, I'll give you the last word.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We looked at the queuing again with the traffic engineers. All the queuing will be on site, so there will be no queuing. One of the last things we discussed with DOT, nothing to do with the school, was to extend the queuing, which we agreed to do from 100 to 250 feet, approximately, Mr. Chairman, but substantial increase to what we had. But again, if the school was to go there, the queuing, there's enough room to have all the queuing on site.
Thank you. All right. There are no further questions. We will not be making any decision on this evening, and I will now close the public hearing. That will take us to our informal comments, which we don't have anyone signed up to speak. And that will take us to our additions, deletions, and/or adoption of the agenda. And per the Sheriff's Department, we are asked to remove item 20 from the regular agenda. And with that, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the agenda is amended.
All right, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed none. And that will take us to our consent agenda.
Motion to approve consent.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none. And that'll take us to item number, looks like 19, appointments to boards and committees. I will make a motion that we appoint Matt Nelson to fill the vacancy on the Central Iowa Workforce Development Board. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, none. All right, that will take us to item number 21, and that is regarding reappraisal. Madam Manager?
Yes, we have Stan Duncan with us this evening, who will be going over a PowerPoint presentation, and I believe Van, during some segments, will also be joining you, if I am correct. Or if I'm not, you can correct me. And this came about on the agenda based upon some discussions I had with commissioners probably back in late July, in which there were some discussions as it related to the reappraisal process. And so we thought doing a presentation that gives you some background information as it relates to that process and what has changed. And Stan, I have no idea what you are doing. No. But that is why we are bringing this before you this evening. We are not asking the board to take any action this evening. This is an information item. However, there will be actions that we are requesting you consider taking at some point in the future.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to come before you and talk about one of my favorite topics. And I'm sure you don't hear that often as boards of commissioners or county administrators, but reappraisals have been a big, big part of my life. I have been responsible for 7 from a private vendor perspective in North Carolina, 2 in the state of Tennessee, probably over 75 when I was with the Department of Revenue, and I conducted 3 in-house reappraisals in Henderson County in 2007, 2011, 2015. I will probably slip up at some point during the night and refer to the word "we" when I'm speaking about Union County. And that's because I've been here now for the better part of 3.5 months, and I have grown quite fond of your tax office staff. In my career with the Department of Revenue, I ought to take this moment to recognize Doug Huffman, who's with us tonight from the department. He has essentially my job that I once had for about 21 years as a liaison between counties and the Department of Revenue with regards to all things ad valorem taxes. But in my career, I have had the opportunity to go in and look at a lot of different county operations. And what has struck me about your county, my first trip here was in 1983, so I've been here through various stages with different assessors over the time, intervening time. You have a very professional staff. And I say that from the standpoint of the customer service, the young ladies who take the phone calls, to the people who take the collection payments, to the staff that works on personal property, works with land records, GIS, deed processing, and especially appraisal. And I had mentioned to the manager, had the occasion to sit in on a, if you will, appraisal staff meeting, and it was one of the best free exchanges of ideas and support to one another that I have witnessed. And I think that's a tribute to what happened many, many years ago when you hired John Petoskey in, and I think it's going to continue with Van, because Van in many ways was mentored by John. That's sort of the basis of where I'm coming from, just so you know. I am retired now from active employment. It's been a joy to be here, but it's time to I think, move on to some other retirement venues. I always start with this slide, even if I'm working, appearing before a Kiwanis club, a community club, a farm organization, county commissioners, is to just remind us where we are in this structure. We are a Dillon's rule state for the most part, and so the North Carolina General Assembly really determines how we go about our actions with regards to property tax. They have designated to the Department of Revenue the general oversight, and that is an oversight that's just come into play that we'll talk about near the end of the presentation with regards to some new reappraisal standards issued by the Department of Revenue. But they are to exercise all the powers necessary, reasonably necessary, to carry out the intent of the General Assembly. And every state has a similar organizational structure, and in most cases it is directed to the Department of Revenue in those respective states. One of the terms I really want us to sort of get out of our system, if I can, several people in this room have heard me pontificate a little bit about this, is we're not doing a revaluation. We don't do revals, and certainly we should never ever use the term re-evaluation. I want to take you back to when you buy a piece of property. In all likelihood, you're going to have an appraisal made, especially if you're buying a house and you're going to finance it through typical financing. You're going to go to the bank and they're going to assign an appraiser to come out and do an appraisal of that property. That's essentially what we do in property tax in North Carolina. We have a different methodology, but we try to arrive at the same end result. So This term reval is typical of what you find as buzzwords in any profession, I think. We tend to adopt shortcuts to our nomenclature, but it doesn't always translate well, especially to the citizens. And bottom line with this is we want the citizens to understand that this is a professional endeavor on their behalf to render a fair and equitable system for their assessments. So I think it becomes us to use the proper terms. It's a reappraisal, and that's the term that's most commonly found in the General Assembly actions. It's also found in the Machinery Act. You'll find it most commonly used in the court orders. It's the only way that you can really meet the test of what the General Assembly intends is to set a professional standard and use the correct terminology. You will find this same terminology in the Uniform Appraisal Standard. We'll talk about that in just a second. That's the definition of market value in North Carolina. USPAP, Uniform Standards of Professional Practice, Appraisal Practice. That is practiced and adhered to by every appraiser in the state of North Carolina, and indeed every appraiser in the United States. Whether it be an MAI, doing commercial industrial property, or a residential appraiser, he adheres to USPAP. And USPAP has a standard 6 that is specific to what we do with ad valorem appraisals to make sure that we reach the same standard of professionalism and defensibility in our work. The IAAOs, the International Association of Assessing Officers, they have a mass appraisal standard, most recently updated in 2013. And as I mentioned earlier, the Department of Revenue has just come out with their reappraisal standards. And we'll talk about what precipitated that in just a moment. The statutory direction, and I won't read this, but essentially, if you take this definition and compare it to every other professional appraisal organization in the country, you will find very, very similar language. There may be some small differences like most probable price, but it's the same intent, is to get to what the market would indicate property should be selling for between a knowledgeable buyer and a knowledgeable seller. Everyone knowing all the uses to which the property could be used and having a full open exchange on the market, meaning it doesn't sell quick, it doesn't stay on the market for a prolonged period of time where someone can gain some leverage. It operates under general market conditions. The bottom line with why we do this is to have a fair distribution of the tax burden. And in terms of real property, we do not want any one class of property, any one location of property to have to pay more than their fair share. Everyone pays according to their holding of value. And this case is an old case. You can see it goes back to 1972, and it's quoted in most all the valuation orders from the appellate courts. So the question of fairness is best reached by shorter reappraisal cycles. And you were under that process earlier. And the economic collapse, if you will, that took place, especially in 2007, 2008, kept you from maintaining that shorter reappraisal cycle. But the hope would be that with your new software that's being migrated and installed in the next 6 months, that you'll be able to get back to that 4-year cycle. We believe it best accomplishes the legislative charge, and I will tell you that the standards adopted by the Department of Revenue and issued to the counties are encouraging counties towards that. Bearing in mind, these standards have to apply to all 100 counties. To the largest, Wake and Mecklenburg, yes, but also to the very smallest, Swain and Tyrrell and Gates. So it may be very difficult for some of them to go to that standard immediately. You are a medium-sized county, and that makes you a little bit more mobile, a little bit more agile, if you will, to be able to return to that standard. We also believe that shorter reappraisal cycles keep the real property appraised closer to the 100% level, which then puts it more fair to other components to your tax base and ultimately meets the goal of the previous court case. Let's look at 2014-15, which is the reappraisal year, and 16-17. If you'll look at the personal property, the public service component, and the registered motor vehicles, you'll see they're all at 100% for each of those years. So in the year of the reappraisal,
was the year that you were most fair and equitable across all types of property in Union County. It would be the very same situation with all other 99 counties. The further you get away from the cycle of 4 years, the more that tends to be, go to the extremes. Your high point was about 119%, and that's when you received notice from the Department of Revenue to conduct the reappraisal. The market had started then to improve some, so your overassessment, if you will, had lessened. You were at 110% the year before the reappraisal, but you were still 10% above on market value for real property. 2016, the market's continuing to improve, which means we have frozen the values of real property. So your median level of assessment, or where the market tends to cluster, if we compare sale prices from an arm's length transaction to those assessed values for those properties, that clustering effect is what we're measuring at 99.71% for 15 and at 95.33% for 2016. You see a significant drop for 2017, 88.4. Your last quarter of sales sent into the Department of Revenue just recently confirmed by the department to us is at 85%. You'll see that we'll be projecting, and I'm using that term again, my apologies, but I think the county will be looking next year at somewhere between 82 and 80% level of assessment based on where the market is going if the current trends continue. If you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to raise the questions or concerns you may have. So who's responsible? Well, clearly when you go to the grocery store, you go to church, you're out about conducting business, the general public's going to hold you responsible in many, many ways, because they're going to come up to you and say, can you not do something about this assessment on this property for me? But actually, by statute, you're responsible for a couple of other things, but nothing more important than the within budgeted appropriation piece of this. The county cannot do what it needs to do without proper funding, and you have done that in the past. So the county is well positioned, so I compliment you for that. Department of Revenue is not responsible. They are simply charged with general specifics oversight. That does not make them responsible. I can argue that the reappraisal standards they've just sent out and distributed are part of that general specific oversight, but it doesn't make them responsible for the outcomes of any one county's reappraisal effort. And it's not the General Assembly. The 1981 Machinery Act is this very thin document, has 161 pages. 34 years later, it has 444 pages. So the General Assembly has shown the propensity to respond to issues regarding property tax. In many cases, exemptions and things of that nature. But in 2011, there was a lot of demand placed on the members of the General Assembly to try to do something to fix the reappraisal problem. And to their credit, they did not act on that. Or we'd have a much thicker Machinery Act today. What they did understand after meetings, and I will tell you that Mr. Petoskey and myself were both members of 3 assessors in the state that met with members of the legislators who had counties under reappraisal in 2011. What those legislators understood was the law was not the problem. Current law was not the problem. The problem was how counties implemented what the charge in the law was. So as a result of that, the General Assembly and certain members of the legislature asked the Department of Revenue to come up with some recommendations for how to improve that end product. And that's how we got to this reappraisal standards being issued from the department. So who is responsible? Let me once again reintroduce you to Mr. Van Harrell. He is by position and by person. By the person occupying that position, he is the responsible individual. He has general charge over the listing, appraisal, assessment of all the property in the county. He has specific charges with regards to the reappraisal. There are certain things that's required by law that he must do simply because of the reappraisal process. So he is, and this has always been the case. This is not anything new. This has always been the case. Your role, you'll see some check marks on these 5 items, and you'll see some triangular bullet points for the others. But you have appointed a tax administrator. That's a term of art to encompass the roles, responsibility, duties of the county assessor and the tax collector. You've done that in the past, going back to, I believe, David King was the first one appointed in that position by Union County, and followed by John Petoskey. You have yet to adopt a resolution for the next reappraisal, and I think that's what the manager was referring to earlier as Van was helping me get set up, is you will need to adopt at some point in time a resolution for the next reappraisal where you schedule that reappraisal to become effective. You will budget as you do each year, so that will be checked off come the last year prior to the reappraisal. There is a reappraisal reserve budget requirement that Mr. Yates and his office submits to the Department of Revenue. That's in place. There's a pattern there, if you will, and as things are needed, it will be included in that budget. Create by resolution a separate board of E&R, and you've done that in the past, and again, I want to commend you for that. That's the growing trend. One of the benefits of that is it takes matters of local property tax out of the purely political arena. And so it allows for you to bring in people who have expertise perhaps in agricultural values, in commercial values, in residential values, wherever it may be, different parts of the county to come in and be able to listen to a taxpayer and his concerns and know something about that property. In almost every case, a member of a special board will know something about the property being appealed. It's either in their area of the county or it's the kind of property that they deal with on a regular basis. And then the last item that will take place the last 6 months of your year prior to the next scheduled reappraisal is to adopt those proposed schedules. I want to impress upon you, if I can, just how important that document is. And the example I'm going to give you is Buncombe County. Buncombe County has to come up with a set of schedules that allow them to appraise the Biltmore House and the most cheap, poorly designed, poorly conditioned property in the county. It has to encompass that kind of range. And I mention that because of something that I think you are going to be looking at as well. I want to describe Union County a little bit. As I said, I've been coming until I became the assessor in Henderson. I came by through Union County on a fairly regular basis and met with all your interim assessors during that time. But there's a big difference here in Union County between the east side of the county and the west side of the county. It's nothing new. There's a big difference between the subdivided development economy versus the rural agricultural economy. And the major traffic arteries, primarily US 74, especially with the Monroe, the new Monroe Expressway versus secondary roads. The media focuses on the west side of residential. The Charlotte Business Journal reports that 3 of the top 5 most affluent neighborhoods in the Charlotte region are in Union County. Number 1 is Marvin, and it's Marvin by not just a hair, it's Marvin by a significant measure. Number 2 was Weddington. Number 5 was Wesley Chapel. Number 3 was Davidson, and number 4 was Tega Cay in South Carolina. Another piece of information that I don't have a slide for, but I can share with you is if we look at percentage growth in population, number 1 in the Charlotte region is Waxhaw. From 2006 to 2016, Waxhaw had a 44% growth in population. Weddington had 11.2% growth. Indian Trail had a 14% growth in that same time period. So you have both population growth and you have affluency as positive factors. Most of that is in the north and northwest and western part of your county. So often, I think counties looking at value fail to properly account for the agricultural economy. And I've been involved with present use value since 1984, served on the advisory board for over 10 years and was in committee work for all those years since '84. You're number 3 in North Carolina in gross receipts, total cash receipts. You're number 3. Number 1 in eggs, number 1 in wheat, number 2 in broilers, 7 in soybeans, and you're tied for 9 in cattle with Cleveland and Yadkin. Number 1 in the state is Sampson County. Number 2 is Duplin. They have nothing to compare with what you have in terms of residential growth, population growth, and affluency. You're completely different from all them. If you looked at just the population growth alone, you would miss the agricultural impact in the economy. If you look at just the agricultural impact in that economy, you'll miss the population growth on the other side of the county. I haven't done the full analysis on this, but I believe if you were to look at value in terms of wealth and value, you would probably be bimodal. That is, you would have one hump that addresses the west side of the county, helps you identify the west side of the county, and another hump, smaller humps, lower values, to identify what's on the east side of the county. I think you're bimodal in terms of total property values. So we look at new parcels by year, and we go back again to 2006 because we have a lot of data that goes back from other sources that start with 2006. 2006 was a good year. Rose-colored glasses were still on in 2006 in most of the state. You saw a decrease in 7, 8, and then you started to fall after 08, 9, 10. You bottomed out, and you've been starting to climb back out. Those are new parcels. That is, parcels created. So that means development plats are taking place. Parents are giving off an acre of land perhaps to their children to build a house. But it's new parcels being created. It's a sign of growth. New residential dwellings by year, again, it follows pretty much that same pattern. Your high point was 2006. That means that's based on permits in many instances. And it fell off again in 2009 and 10, slowly trying to regain back. We're going to start here with 2006, and this is the residential construction. It takes about 4 seconds in between the slides. And I want you to pay attention to what's happening in other parts of the county. We know about the west and the northwest. Look at what is happening in other parts of the county. You still have things happening. There's still building going on. It's not simply all taking place and nothing happening on the other part of the county. And I think, again, if we watch the media outlets and how they report things, we think all your growth, all your activity is on the west and northwestern part of the county. But you'll see quite a bit of activity. Yes, there's more activity in the west, but there's still quite a bit of activity taking place in the southern part, eastern part of the county. And the last one here would be 2017. And then we'll have a combination slide of all those years added together. And you'll see the clustering that has taken place along Highway 74. Look at Marshall on the east side of the county. There's a small clustering of residential construction there. Again, look at in the far south, you have quite a bit of construction. So again, most counties would not have this kind of picture. They would see, especially coming out of the recession that we had, they would see the clustering perhaps somewhere around a county seat, but they wouldn't see it throughout the rest of the county. So there is a vibrancy to the residential construction. There's a vibrancy to your market. Look at sales. They will mirror exactly what we just saw in the residential new construction. Typically, when there's a demand for homes, the builders will come forth and they will build, developers will develop, and they will sell. So we start again with 2006, and again, look at, if I can, direct your attention just for a little bit out towards Marshall. You'll see quite a few sales taking place. So that's new construction, because we had the new construction earlier. It's also existing homes. And the important part for me as an appraiser and as someone involved in this kind of work, you had a recent article by the CEO from Allen Tate, and he talks about he mentions 42% of the homes that he sees on the market are really not right now geared to meet consumer taste and preferences. that means that they probably need updating in some way. I haven't had a chance to give him a call. I want to talk to him about that a little bit, but I think what you're seeing with that cluster in Marshall especially is homes that are selling, but they're not new homes. There's a lot more sales there than there are new home constructions. And again, you have this activity throughout the county. And then we have the combination slide. Again, you have, I think, quite a bit of data available for your staff to take the professional approach to doing the reappraisal. Not everything in the county will change at the same rate, obviously. Each community, each development, each neighborhood will be its own separate analysis, and they will change differently. The idea is not to have them all increase to a certain level. The idea is to make sure that they are at market value, even if in some instances you might have to reduce a certain neighborhood, is to get it back to market value. Commercials, just a real quick summary slide here. You see again the impact that the recession had on commercial buildings. And then this is just a summary of all those different constructions. And again, it's the 74 corridor, some out on the west side, primarily the 74 corridor. Your history, and I stole this in part from Jeff. We added the reappraisal year at 100% line, and then we also added where we're projecting for next year for the 18 median to be based on 2017 sales. It simply shows what has been happening, and this is true in most of the counties. We had counties that went way up over, but none quite to the extent that you did. 19% above market value, really, you sort of broke the ceiling on that. And it had to do purely with where the market was. And the values don't change in between the reappraisal years. You change the values based on the analysis for the reappraisal year. One thing I want to mention, I've mentioned that I've been impressed by your staff. They have a challenge before them that a fee appraiser does not have. A fee appraiser, again, when he goes out to look at a piece of property for lending purposes or because the owner wants to get an idea of what it could be worth on the market, he has to appraise that one property based on a selection of a few comps to a specific date. And in some extreme examples, he might give a range of a week, maybe a month, but never more than that for large commercial industrial properties. Usually it's to a specific date. Your appraisal staff has to analyze sales that are taking place and be able to project those sales in terms of what's going to happen come the reappraisal year. So obviously the sales that are taking place the year before the reappraisal are the most, given the most weight. Once the reappraisal is set, it doesn't matter how high things may go after that or how low they may go, the county can't change those values. So they have to go out and appraise new construction that takes place 2 years after the reappraisal date on the basis of what it would have been worth had it existed on January 1 of the reappraisal year. That's like splitting your brain and saying, okay, this morning I'm going to look forward and this afternoon I'm looking backwards. It's a really tough thing for any county staff to do. But your county staff, the reason those extremes are there is because they honored the reappraisal schedule of values. They did their job as they should do, no matter what the market was doing in between those reappraisal years. Typically, after the reappraisal year, we are lower than market value. But as you know, and you experienced it firsthand, after the recession, values stayed the same in terms of your assessments, but the sales plummeted. This is a little closer history, only going back and just looking at a little closer detail. It's the same exact data as in the earlier slide. The reappraisal team, your in-house reappraisal team, has to subscribe to all the economic principles that any fee appraiser does. The principle of substitution, the principle of anticipation, that value is created by the anticipation of future benefits. They have to subscribe to consistent use. They cannot appraise land for one use and a building for a separate use. They must be compatible. Probably the biggest economic principle they deal with, though, is change. And as we have heard from realtors for time immemorial, the three most important factors is location, location, location. Certainly that is a large piece of it, but it's also property type. And then we can get into the variations of those same type properties. Not every residence is the same. A residence on the east end of the county or the west end of the county are vastly different on average. So we have to appraise each of those types separately and still come up to the market value. So recognizing change that will take place since January 1 of 2015 to the date that you select as your next reappraisal date, that will be the big communication effort as part of the reappraisal process to get out to the general public. Again, mass appraisals have to adhere to USPAP Standard 6. They have to adhere to the IAAO standard on mass appraisal. The IAAO standard was adopted and included in the Department of Revenue's reappraisal standards that was published just this past August. So you're embedded with that. You have to meet those standards. And there's several citations within the Department of Revenue's reappraisal standards that cite the IAAO standard. It is just simply an economic snapshot. So often in North Carolina, our snapshot is January 1. South Carolina is December 31. Most states, though, honor the January 1 date. So what was happening as close as you can determine in terms of if property were to sell on that date, what would it have sold for? And you're basing it on sales that took place, again, for the most part, 6 months to 18 months prior to that date. The standards we'll go over just very briefly, distributed on August the 14th, effective January 1 of next year. Again, these started after the 2011 reappraisals, and I don't have any question but what you're familiar with what happened in some of those counties in 2011. The standards are geared towards better planning. Not every county does an in-house reappraisal. I think the Department of Revenue still recommends that that be the standard to do in-house, but some counties simply don't have the staff. They don't have the budget for that, so they have it contracted. Studies have indicated that contracted reappraisals never are as consistent, never as uniform, never as close to market value as reappraisals performed by county staff. They implemented statistical measures, both in terms of the median, where that cluster is, as well as uniformity by coefficient of dispersion. They talk about communication plan, and you have to submit to DOR for their approval a reappraisal plan, if you will, a business plan for the reappraisal. So for a county that wanted to do a reappraisal in 2020, under the new guidelines, that reappraisal plan would have to be submitted on by January 1, 2018. It's basically 2 years in advance that reappraisal plan has to be in effect. We've talked about the adherence to that, to the standards in IAAO and USPAP. Again, we're trying to get counties to move towards a 4-year reappraisal program because we believe, again, the shorter the cycle, the more fair to everyone. And it doesn't matter in terms of fairness whether the market in real estate is going up or down. The more often you can reappraise, the better. Texas requires an annual assessment system. You can imagine with what happened with Harvey, what that's going to do to their values in real property for January 1 of next year. Likely a very significant decrease in market value. Florida does annual assessments. Several states do. Alabama, I think, was the last state to move to an annual assessment system. We still have the 8-year rule, but the recommendation is to go to a 4-year rule, and I would expect at some point in time there'll be a technical change, technical amendment to go to, say, a 4-year standard and get away from the 8 years. We've talked about the reappraisal plan. New ratios. The ratio currently in the law with regards to public service companies is 85%. When your ratio falls below 85% median, you have to do a reappraisal. You'll get a notice, as you did in previously. When you were at 119%, it works both ways, too high or too low. You get those notices. But in the standard, they're going for 90% or 10%. So instead of a 15% variance, it's a 10% variance. Again, I mentioned to you 88.4 for 17. We look at for 18, it's going to be 80 to 82. Let's take this one step further. If this trend continues, you'll be below 85% next year, which means that for 2019, your fourth year following the reappraisal in 15, you will be faced with a reduction in public service company values from the Department of Revenue. That reduction will be based on your median ratio for 2019 with some factoring in of your personal property and your motor vehicles at 100%. So it won't be a true reciprocal, but it will be adjusted a little bit by the presumption that you are at 100% for personal property and 100% for motor vehicles. But you would have a reduction in value from what the state would be issuing you when they certify the values for public service companies, your Duke Power, your railroads, those type properties. Under the guidelines, we should be conducting a random sampling of about 786 parcels, improved parcels, to evaluate the data accuracy and reliability. The goal is a 95% accuracy for factual data about improved parcels and a 90% accuracy for those things that are more subjective, like grade of construction, physical condition, determinations, effective age, things of that nature. Mr. Huffman may disagree with me, but I don't believe there's a county in the state that can meet that requirement at the present time. I think it's a goal that we're going to be orienting ourselves towards. Obviously, having the survey, when we get those back, the county has already started this process. We did ask and were given approval to do a much smaller sampling of about 300 parcels, improved parcels. And that's underway. And my understanding is they think they'll have that completed within the next 2 weeks, certainly. Doing the final evaluation of that may take a little bit longer, but certainly the field work within a week, maybe 10 days. So again, the reappraisal plan that would have to be submitted when the date is set and you choose your date for the reappraisal will be effective 2 years prior on January 1. You need to have that budget nailed down and through the finance office. Staffing, make sure we have enough people to do what needs to be done to comply with that particular section. And that is a section that is probably still a goal. You're at about 13,000 parcels per appraiser currently, and that standard is quite a bit less than that. But there are ways to compensate for some of that by using some technology to look at properties that have changed, and that's something that's been discussed both with the manager and with staff. Outsourcing needs, if there's a need for that, hardware, software, again, you're taking a giant step with this new software DevNet on the CAMA side of the equation. It is highly GIS centric, meaning it's highly locational centric, both in terms of parcel data and in terms of improvement data. And I think it's a significant step forward for you as you move not just to the next reappraisal, but beyond that, and continue to develop the analytics you need to show where things are taking place and how much. And then a timeline. A reappraisal plan has to have a timeline for when you adopt schedules, when you will hold hearings, when you will send notices, and so forth. So what will happen? I'm sure Mr. Petoskey probably had a slide similar to this in some of his presentations with you. Appraisals and assessed values will change. Some will go up, some will stay about the same, some may even decrease a few. But they will change. But they are intended again to reflect the economic snapshot, the economic conditions as of that January 1 date that you choose for the reappraisal. Future actions that are needed, again, nothing is expected of tonight, but certainly you need to be thinking about when do you want to have your next reappraisal, and I would certainly encourage you to get with the manager and county administration and Van and his staff and discuss what would be a good timeline going forward to have your next reappraisal schedule. And then, of course, once that's done, you'll send a notice to the Department of Revenues to that next scheduled date. That usually again goes from Jeff's office through Deborah to Department of Revenue's property tax section. But you have options. That's the main thing. You do have options going forward, but they all have, as in most cases with options, there's some cost and there's some benefits to be determined, but that would be for you as a collective body, again, with the manager's input and Mr. Harrell's input to decide what's the best course of action for Union County. And with that, I'll try to answer any questions or take any comments you may have.
Any questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, next item is Commissioner Rushing is interested in an ordinance or legislative request addressing the issue of individuals using firearms while under the influence of alcohol. Commissioner Rushing, you'd like to discuss that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the last couple of years, we've had instances where folks have been concerned about hunting around their homes, and a lot of times it's near a municipality. And as we all know, county's got diverse needs, and we have 14 municipalities that we're dealing with, and sometimes one size doesn't fit all, and this would be one of the cases. We've asked for minimum distances from homes, but that in New Salem could be different from the need in Weddington or Waxhaw and those areas. So one thing that we can do, and in talking to the Wildlife Resources Commission officers over the last couple of years, is they would like a tool to be able to use in order to, if they found somebody that was intoxicated while hunting, or they come upon somebody that's under influence while hunting, that they actually had some teeth. And there is regulations in different counties, local hunting regulations that each county can put in, and we do that through legislation. So we'd have to go through our legislative delegation and ask them to request that to be put into the wildlife book. What we're looking at, and this would be a sample of what we could do, would be to make it unlawful to take or attempt to take wildlife under the influence of an impairing substance, or after having consumed sufficient alcohol that the person has an alcohol concentration of 0.08 or more. We could be more, we could ask for something more strict than that. We could ask for something less than that. I know Stanley County to our north has an ordinance of this nature. Some other counties in North Carolina have this, and I think that it would be a wise thing to do for us to ask for this, especially with the amount of folks that we do have in the western side of the county and anywhere in the county that could be in danger. It's not where the bullet starts, it's where the bullet ends up, and it would be, I know I feel better about it and we teach every month. We teach a class and tell the kids that drugs and alcohol and guns don't mix. And I think this will send a clear message to all of our folks in the county that participate that that this is something that we don't want to see happen. I believe there would be also some tools that would come to the wildlife officers, such as breathalyzers and things that they may not have at this time that would be beneficial to them in making our streets safe. So with that, I'd ask that we direct staff to research and provide a recommendation regarding the potential for a local ordinance or a legislative solution that would address being under the influence of alcohol. And this is while using a firearm. While in South Carolina, it's illegal to do that on any circumstance. I believe this would be in the hunting. This would be the hunting regulation manual. Is where we're looking to put that instead of just a blanket term. So rather than just while using a firearm while hunting.
Okay. So we have a motion and discussion. Commissioner?
Could I offer a friendly amendment? The way it's written, it's just alcohol, but unfortunately today there are other substances that impair just
That's
not
correct.
great.
And that other take or attempt to take wildlife under the influence of an impairing substance. So illegal drugs should also be included in that discussion. And if you need, I can provide that to whoever on staff needs that language
Okay.
to make sure we get it right.
All right, any further discussion on the motion as amended? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? All right, that will take us to the county manager's comments.
I have no comments this evening.
All right, Commissioner Jerry Simpson,
No comments.
Commissioner Rushing.
I would like to thank the mayor of Waxhaw for coming tonight. I think it was a very good discussion, and, you know, we've had a couple of meetings here that the public had thought something was gonna go one way or the other way. And we've had a very good discussion without pointing fingers, without laying blame. And I think it's been a very good educational process for our citizens, and would like to thank the mayor of Waxhaw for participating in that.
Vice Chairman?
Yeah, I'd like to thank the young Marines for coming tonight to bring us the red ribbon. This week is the 70th anniversary of Air Force, and I take a lot of pride in that. So that's all. I appreciate it.
All right, and I have no comments. So with that, we'll motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None.